Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. Today is with James Katz, who's the Growth Strategy Lead in EMEA for Ubic. This is one I've been really looking forward to, just getting to know these guys, and they're a great bunch with a great product. So good morning, James.
Morning, Simon. Good to talk to you. How you doing?
Very good, thank you. We're kind of just getting to know you guys. I think we've known each other, is in Rethink Ubic for 9 months, let's say. Before we jump into the detail of tracking tasks and task management, let's find out a bit more about you. James, where have you come from? How did you get to Ubic?
So I've been at Ubic for 3 years, almost 3 years exactly now, actually. And before that, it was my first job since graduating from university. So when I joined, I was hire number 40, something like that. And over the last 3 years, we've grown to over 200 now across 8 offices around the world. So I've been really lucky to see the kind of hyper growth period. And I joined and have experienced different commercial roles working with our teams in the UK, in Southern Europe, had some experience working with the US team as well. So been very lucky to have experience across a few different markets. And the company itself is a little bit older than my time there. We're nearly 6 years old now. And the founders, 3 French brothers, 2 twins and a younger brother, are kind of serial entrepreneurs who have set up businesses and this is their latest venture. So yeah, an interesting company, and I've been there for an interesting period of time. And
Ubic is task management, task tracking. How do you pull it together? What do you do? And for those that are new to this kind of area of task tracking, what does the app do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the conversations that we've had, I think task management has been the crux of really where there's been overlap between the work that Rethink Productivity do and where Ubic do. There's some other elements to the platform as well. So the positioning of the company and the product is really an all-in-one platform for deskless workers. So these are people who don't sit behind a computer during the day, either on the floor. So in areas like retail, which is really where we've come from. Obviously, store associates and regional managers and those kind of roles often don't sit behind a desk for large proportions of the day. And over the last sort of 6 to 18 months, we've been branching into new areas where these deskless workers appear as well. So places, things like hospitality, and more recently into areas like logistics and other places where, as I say, workers don't generally sit behind a desk all day. The general principle of the company is a 3-pillared approach. So the first is around exactly as your introduction alluded to, task management, task optimization. So really the digitalization of processes that are traditionally paper-based and therefore quite convoluted, time-consuming. And I think that's really where we've enjoyed the most productive conversations between Ubic and Rethink Productivity, because these processes are often incredibly unproductive. And so the digitalization of them and the streamlining of some of the processes makes them a lot more productive. And I think, hopefully over the course of the conversation, we'll get into more detail on that one. Then the other 2 pillars being a learning platform, so mobile learning that comprises of micro learning, social learning, so things like questions and answers from the community, as well as incentivizing some of that learning. So we've got a really sophisticated learning platform as well. And then the final piece being employee engagement. So really trying to make the communication streams between various levels of quite often complex organizations, as you well know, big sort of multinational or high street names, very complex organizations. And so making sure that the communication streams, whether that be individual chats or broadcasting news through things like newsfeed and those kind of things, are done in an efficient and targeted way. The real kind of nice element of the Ubic platform is the combination of all 3 of those things. So the task optimization, the learning, and the communications tool, to really make it, as I said, an all-in-one platform, so that you can, as a deskless worker, log on at the beginning of the day, and really it's your one-stop shop for most of the things that you're going to need to do your job on any given day.
Yeah, I like the way you've brought it all under one framework, if you like, because you've got that fear that as an organisation, the biggest part, if I'm a retailer, of my workforce, like you say, is deskless. But actually, I then end up giving them 5, 6, 7 apps, one to check my tasks, one to check my comms, one to check my payslip, one to check my emails, that isn't really going to work. So I know there was this big historic move to empower people on the floor with devices or ways of accessing information. But I think the fear was always they'd end up with 20 apps, if you like. So I like the way you've got the 3 pillars, and that's really cool. And just for context, I suppose, so to give a real life example, I'm thinking if my retail company, let's say Simon Hedo Retail, we introduced new cleaning practices because of COVID. So we did more hand sanitizing, more cleaning doorknobs, cleaning counters. I could facilitate that task and the completion of that task through Ubic. And then if there was questions about that or different learnings from performing those tasks, that could be done through kind of the learning platform as a initial training piece and then a continuous improvement piece. Is that right?
That's exactly right. I mean, I think just kind of leading on from the last point you made, what we've really tried to focus on with the learning platform is to make it operational. So I think a lot of training tools that exist in the market currently are quite focused on things like onboarding and kind of those HR tasks that need to be done, and important though they are, and we look to be able to handle those tasks as well. But what we've really tried to do by working with our clients and seeing how they want to make training more in line with the day-to-day operational task is to operationalize, as I call it, the learnings that are broadcast through the Ubic platform. So the example you give is a really good one, where we're not only trying to give the ability for the tasks to be sent out and then to be monitored and analyzed around things like cleaning and making sure that sites are COVID secure, but also to give specific training courses to show the importance of that. You know, right at the beginning of the COVID crisis, the platform was used to educate deskless workers on exactly what they should be looking out for if they find cases on their sites, exactly how to deal with that. So we really, and obviously we've come a long way from there, and the training element of the end-to-end solution is more focused on how to make sites, you know, ready to go for the world in which we're now living. Yeah, it's definitely a really crucial part of the process. And as I say, I think it's the use of the training tool as much done by those operational teams within companies as it is the HR teams. And that's really what we envisaged when we brought the learning pillar. So I think your example is a really, really interesting one.
Good. It kind of begs the question then, if I've got a big bunch of deskless workers, how historically would I have communicated to them? Because it seems an area where there's only recent innovation in managing tasks, and like you talked about, the whole operational learning piece and employee engagement and comms in a mobile way. So how historically have they done it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. Obviously, a lot of the people that we work with are old organizations from newer innovations like Ubic. And so the companies have really been built on using fairly rudimentary tools that have edged forward over time. So we see a real reliance on things like email to execute a lot of tasks that need to be executed within stores, but still a real reliance on individual people going to visit individual sites, which of course in the new world in which we live has its own problems as well. So a lot of these kind of, as I say, quite rudimentary old-fashioned tools. Some of the edges forward that we've seen are things like, I think there's quite a reliance on WhatsApp, as I'm sure a number of the organizations that you work with and that we work with would attest to. WhatsApp groups just popping every few seconds, especially if you're a regional manager, for example, with many sites that you cover. So a real reliance on those kind of tools, which have their own problems, obviously. You know, there's security issues, there's issues around merging professional and personal. So I think there's been a slow inclusion of some of these newer technologies, but a lot of that has just been done organically. And I think the companies that we work with see the implementation of a piece of technology like Ubic not only as a technology implementation, but a real change management situation where they're trying to modernize their businesses and come away from some of the, as I've explained, quite rudimentary tools on which their processes are run, and really bring them into the technology age. And we're very conscious of the fact that when these projects are embarked on, it requires a real focus on how these things are being executed and how the business can reshape or reorganize or become more efficient through using technology. And I think that's one of the areas that obviously we've had really good conversations is it's not just about technology, it's about business fundamentally. And the technology should just be a part of the business plan and the business goals that the clients that we work with are trying to get to. And we're very, very conscious of that. And the technology really leads with that focus is not just what cool toys can we throw at the platform, but what could we throw at the platform that's actually going to add value to the businesses that we work with. And it can be challenging because, as you allude to, they come from, in some cases, fairly primitive places. So it is a challenge, and it's one that we have had a lot of success with the clients that we've worked with for a number of years now.
A couple of points just to circle back around on there. I think you're absolutely right on WhatsApp. We see a lot of WhatsApp interaction when we're out doing studies in various clients in various different sectors. people have got into the habit of it because it's low cost. You download the app, you don't particularly have to pay for anything. But back to your points, I think there's a real challenge with it's unregulated. There's that grey line between personal and professional, and clearly anything that's work context, even if it's personal, can be brought back to the work environment if it's not appropriate. And I've seen some groups where there's photos, there's potentially confidential business briefings and information, but nobody's managing the group. So you've got people that have left the business that potentially get in. There's a whole bunch of stuff, as I'm sure you'll know. The interesting thing for me, if I just think back to my retail career and how we communicated to deskless workers, so colleagues, it started off on a Friday, we'd get a blue bag. In the blue bag would be all the weekly comms, so promotional briefs, company briefs, all sorts of stuff that went through it. And as a part of the leadership team, you'd sift through that, take out the management only information, and then have to cascade the rest. That cascade would be either by a daily huddle, so you'd capture all the people that were there, but that was only a small percentage of the people that may work that day because you'd do it at 9 o'clock. So anybody who started at after 9, you kind of relied on them reading the huddle right up on the board, or you had to go around and do more face-to-face or individual briefings, which one takes time and two becomes inconsistent because you've got no way of knowing that everybody's been briefed. You've also got no way of knowing that people have understood or digested the information. So there's not really a feedback loop in there unless they're comfortable to ask questions in groups or have the time to consider it. So that journey's it's come a long way, but in a long space of time. So the innovation only seems to be over the last, Hubit's been going 6 years, that time period almost, because I'm thinking back probably 15 years. It's interesting how these things become a hot topic and then that almost drives the tech and drives the innovation.
And I think
if you've got any fit.
Yeah, the other thing to say to that, I think, is as well, obviously, the type of people that are now working in sites. I mean, I guess every generation would, claims to be brand new to the one previously, but especially with some of the other innovations in the rest of life outside of the workplace, that is now the bedrock of the term is vastly overused, but the millennial generation, staff at a number of stores and in the other sectors that we work with in places like hospitality also, they're very used to using technology as the way that they go through their lives, whether it be communicating with friends or, coming out of school and university, using tools to get through the rest of their life. So it makes sense for that kind of thinking, that kind of technological philosophy, I guess, to be transferred into the workplace. So, it's really interesting to hear, your anecdotes as to how sites work. And we see it. It's understandable, right? I mean, it's with the tools that were available and the type of people that were in sites using things like morning briefings and huddles, as you explain, is a really understandable way of doing it. It's just riddled, as you've touched on, riddled with areas where there could be slippages of information, or the information might not be particularly well targeted. It could be quite inefficient to get that information and action it. So, yeah, I think as well with the improvements in technology, it's the shifts in the demographics of the people that are staffing these institutions where there are deskless workers that I think has been one of the other real propellants of change. And we've really tried to take that into consideration. We've taken a lot of inspiration and some of our design team have come from that B2C world, where working on how to design mobile applications that are used directly by consumers outside of the professional environment. And we've really tried to take inspiration from that to make the tools incredibly intuitive, because you don't want technology to slow things down because it takes half an hour to work out actually what you're doing. You want it to be just like using Facebook, just like using Instagram, where it's obvious how to do things on those platforms. And that's really the inspiration that we've got. And the thing that's interesting from talking to you, and really interested to hear your insights, is what is it about mobile technology that is actually better than those old tools? Because as well as technology can be very beneficial, we're very well aware that it can also cause issues in workforces. So interested to what your thoughts are on how technology can actually be successfully implemented, not just implemented full stop.
Some of it comes back to the Apple led the way, didn't they, with whoever read a user manual for an iPhone. Is there even a user manual for an iPhone? I don't know. I've had a couple and upgrade every 2 years, stick with Apple, but I know how to use it. No one's ever told me how to download an app or what the App Store does, and that's set the benchmark, hasn't it, for all applications moving forward. The evolution of technology, there was a whole point when bring your own device was the next big thing, and probably didn't transpire, but I think what came out of that was people being able to access information when they want to consume it. So I don't think there's anything wrong with a daily brief, a daily huddle. I think it's good to get the physical people in that deskless environment together for 5-10 minutes to just have a chat about how everybody is, what the plan for the day is. But actually, the bit that was always missing was, if I can't digest that then, or I want to go back, I had nowhere to go, probably other than ask the manager about where that information was. And then it was probably on one email, one printout. So as soon as it's given to someone, you've kind of lost track who's got it. So I think for me, the big step forward is having that repository of information that in my own time, when I want to, I can go back and hunt out the bits of information that are important to me, that I didn't know I'd missed, that I wanted to check I was up to date with. That was never there. It was a piece of paper.
Absolutely. And I think the site level benefits are exactly as you describe it. And it's really good to hear that your experiences match what we're trying to do with the platform. The other side of the coin, of course, is not at site level, but at HQ level or regional level, being able to see trends and being able to react quickly to what's going on in your network. And using those traditional tools that we've been talking about, it's incredibly difficult to do that. It's very difficult to see when things are going right and when things are going wrong, and then obviously to dig into the diagnosis of those either problems or best practice examples. And so the other huge benefit of digitizing some of these processes and coming away from things like huddles as the main thrust. I mean, I think you're right. I think there is still a place for getting people together, but for the main thrust of task execution, of learning, of engagement, these kind of things that UBIC hopes to provide, is the ability for then that information to in real time go back to HQ teams, to regional teams, so that they can make decisions quickly. And we have a very much a focus not on just that being to solve problems, although that is obviously incredibly important for either reducing costs or increasing revenue within businesses, but also to share best practice, because that can be equally as beneficial to the bottom line of a company. If you can grab something that a store is doing really well, or another site in other industries that individuals are doing really well, and shout that out incredibly quickly to the rest of your staff, rather than waiting for the blue bag as you described it in your experience at the end of the week. It's probably 1 or 2 weeks for the best practice to get back, then 1 or 2 weeks for that best practice to be wrapped up and then sent back in a blue bag, and then it to be filtered out to the teams. For that to be able to happen in real time, and for HQ to be able to coordinate that sharing of best practice or the elimination of issues, is the other huge benefit that using technology brings. And I think one of the reasons that clients that we work with see it so much benefit in it, and from putting in the effort to come away from those traditional tools. These retailers and these other deskless organizations most of them have been incredibly successful for a long period of time. So there's got to be good reason to come away from the traditional tools. And I think getting the balance between making things a lot easier at site level and having that repository, that one-stop shop, as I said, where you can go to get your tasks, to get your learnings, to get your communications, to get everything incredibly efficient at store level, and then incredibly beneficial for sort of strategic reasons at HQ level. I think when those two things work hand in hand, I think you've got the perfect formula for a project that is well worth the undertaking. And we've seen the ability to deliver massive return on investment through thinking on those two levels: the efficiency and the improvement in processes at store level, and the improvement in the strategic oversight that you can get at HQ. And I think it's making sure that those two things work hand in hand is really been the focus of the projects that we've worked on, and that we hope to work with you on going forward in the future as well.
The strategic bit's really interesting. So there's a number of examples from, again, my time working in retail that I can see it kind of hits the bullseye straight away. So things like training records. So if there's a confirmation that somebody's had their yearly manual handling training and health and safety refresher, I remember we used to spend an eternity gathering training records, confirming who'd been done, who hadn't, and that would then get passed up to regional level and then company level. Things like health and safety removals. So if there's a product that for whatever reason has been recalled or needs to come off, we always used to really struggle with the confirmation of it. So had you taken it off? Had you taken the shelf edge label off? Had you quarantined it in the warehouse? Had you raised a return note? So all those binary process things, photos of promotional ends or weekend offers, again, there's lots of reactive stuff that will happen going forward in retail, whether that's based on price sensitivity, whether that's based on competitor activity, the weather even. If I'm talking retail here, how do I know that my stores have consistently implemented that? Well, normally it's kind of the manager confirms it to the regional or area manager, and they might visit in that period and give it the thumbs up or thumbs down, but it's kind of too late then, because one, they can't be everywhere, And two, if somebody hasn't done it or done it to the brief, you've missed the opportunity. And moving forward, it's all going to be about seizing the opportunity. And it just brings me back again to some historic ways of working. Prior to the blue bag I mentioned, we used to have a process, and this was a DIY retailer I worked for, called chain messages. And it kind of makes you laugh when you think about what I'm about to describe. There'd be a message that had come down from head office, and each region would have a base store. Somebody from head office would ring the base store, and this was kind of as email was in its infancy, and say, I don't know, 5 litre Woodland Green Timber Care's got an issue with it. Please remove it all from sale immediately. Any customer that comes back with it, give them a refund. So there'd then be a chain of phone calls. So the base store would have a store to call. They'd relay the message. They'd then phone the store they knew to call, relay the message. So kind of a game of Chinese whispers. And God knows if the message was ever the same by the time it got to the end. But you think about in the new world how that could work. You could send the message out. Every store could confirm they'd done it. If needs be, I suppose, provide some visual evidence. So centrally, all of a sudden, I've got this view I've never had, probably quite quickly, of this is the compliance to that critically important task. And then the outliers, because you're always going to get outliers, can be dealt with by the regional manager, area manager phoning up and saying, look, I see you've not confirmed it. Have you done it and just not confirmed it? If not, you need to crack on. Huge benefits from compliance, from a business overview point of view, from, I suppose, focusing the energy on getting it 100% compliant without having to travel to every store and consume time. So yeah, I really buy into that strategic piece as well. I think it's some phenomenal benefits.
And I think it's really interesting, obviously, the year in which we're discussing this, where businesses are going to change, and businesses are going to have to become probably even leaner than they are now. And those challenges that you describe, I think, are going to be even more pertinent. How do you make sure that critical information on things like product recalls or the other operational tasks that you were mentioning, how do you make sure that they are quickly executed within increasingly leaner organizations? So that's a challenge, right? I mean, it's the combination of using the historic tools that aren't efficient in increasingly leaner organizations. I think we will see over the next year or so a lot of development within brick and mortar retail and other industries where there is those deskless workers to be able to operate efficiently and even operate better, because of course, especially if it looks like there's going to be a little bit of an economic blip over the next year or so, within increased competition, you don't have to operate as you're doing. You have to operate as even better, but with the constraints of a leaner organization potentially. So I think it's a really pertinent time to be discussing it. Obviously, it's been brought about by the pandemic, but I think it's accelerated a lot of the conversations and a lot of the thinkings that a lot of retailers were having anyway. It's going to be an interesting short, medium and long term for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And did the pandemic drive any changes in the product or any different ways of thinking?
We've developed the product for some specific examples, which I'll come on to, but I think it's really as much about thinking about those business processes and kind of touching on what I was just mentioning is how can we make sure that the things that now need to be done quickly, very, very quickly, are being done to a compliant standard. So I think the pandemic brought on business thinking and a way of using technology that was necessary for businesses to adapt to the new normal, as is the in vogue phrase. But on top of that, we have brought on some new innovations as well. So a couple of things really that I think are important to point out is the first around the change in the shopping experience. If we talk about retail for a moment, when obviously there's a lot of queues outside front doors, a lot of people wanting to think more carefully about when they do leave the house, exactly planning their day on the high street or their day going to a shopping centre or a retail park, things like that. So we've innovated to bring around a new product called virtual queuing, where you can, by scanning a QR code or accessing a link that's embedded on a company's website or in a Google store profile, for example, you can join a wait list so that you'll just be let in as soon as possible. So a real virtual queue, or you can book appointments so that you can, I'm going to go to my local shopping centre tomorrow and I'm going to book time to go into store X at 10 o'clock, store Y at 11 o'clock and so on and so forth. So that ability to kind of plan your day in a little bit more detail. And then another piece as well called call and collect, where you can actually have a conversation through your phone or through your computer with either somebody in store or a central team, talk about the product range or to talk about those other things that you would go into store and perhaps spend 10 minutes longer talking to a store associate about at home, so that when you do go to pick up your item in store, you can make the transaction much quicker. So we brought in those innovations in terms of changing the customer experience and making it more COVID friendly, I guess. And we're seeing some really, real good uptake on those platforms and on those products from an early stage. And I think they'll become part of the norm. I think what's interesting actually is this idea of queuing and waiting and planning your day. I think it's actually something that probably one of those trends that's actually been accelerated, but isn't necessarily just tied to the pandemic. The ability for the shopper to be more strategic in how they're going to go about their trip to the shopping centre or to the high street, I think is something that's going to be really, really beneficial, hopefully when the pandemic is completely behind us. So it's an innovation that's been brought on and accelerated by COVID, but I don't think necessarily limited to the time in which we're living under its gaze. And then the other thing as well is this. It comes back to something you mentioned earlier, actually, Simon, which is around making sure that those health and safety protocols are filled out. What we've really tried to do is have a focus on not just making sure that they're filled out, but exposing the history of those health and safety checks or those cleaning procedures being completed to the customer, so that when they're inside a store or inside another location, a restaurant or a hotel or whatever it may be, they can scan a QR code or follow a link very quickly, and they can see a live history of when those cleaning procedures or when those health and safety protocol have been followed. So we've all seen kind of bits of A4 tables stuck on the back of toilets in airports and things of when the cleaning was done, but really to bring this into the shopping experience. And the reason that is so important is it gives the shopper the confidence and the comfort to know that they're in a safe environment, which is obviously a good thing for them. And for the retailer or for the company who's doing this task, the restaurant or whoever it may be, they're probably more likely to spend an extra 10 minutes or to pick up another product or get the ability to cross-sell them something. So really giving the shopper the confidence to then hopefully, on the retailer side, go out and spend a little bit more money than they may have otherwise done so. So we've brought in those kind of two specific areas that are, of course, product development. And then there's been, as I mentioned before, just a general thinking to really get in touch with the clients that we work with already and to kind of change the conversation with the prospects that we're talking to think more about how business is done because of the situation and how technology can be used to make sure that those processes are done in an efficient and orderly way so that records are kept and all the things that you've described. So that's really how Ubic has been responding to the crisis on a business point of view and on a technology point of view as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. That whole planning your shopping trip more proactively, so almost booking in, if you like, I think is an interesting way of thinking how the future will pan out. Because as a retailer, the biggest thing I don't know is when somebody's going to come and visit me. So unless I've got a specialist personal shopping service or a specialist service that's time bound or kind of capacity driven, I don't know, the men's groomers in Selfridges, for example, you have to book in because they've only got a certain amount of people. I think it really helps retailers the more what I'd call predictable workload they can drive, as in bookings and appointments. They then can start to get better at making sure they've got the right people to leverage that opportunity. And if people take the time to book, they're probably, and I suspect there's some correlation out there somewhere, more likely to buy more because they're a serious shopper, if you like. They're not just browsing. They've committed to coming at that time and probably have an idea of what they want. And again, from a data point of view, you can probably start to tease out to them, what is it you're coming in for today? Is there a particular category, particular product we can get ready for you? Oh, and guess what? Everybody else who tried this on bought this. So there's a whole way of leveraging and driving conversion that probably people are just starting to tread around the edges of, which I think will be fascinating. The other bit that I really liked was when you talked about taking the health and safety check data, for example, and looking back as well at the trends in that. If you've not read it, there's a really good book by Matthew Side, which is called Black Box Thinking, which is about that whole taking historic data. And this is the example he uses is around black boxes in aeroplanes. So they did a load of analysis of near misses in aeroplanes. And what they found was people were afraid to report those near misses because of what would happen in terms of to them personally. But actually, when they changed the culture and people started to explain and talk about the near misses, it ended up with there being less because it was an educational bit.
The more regimented approach to making sure that these things that need to be done are done is absolutely the way that things are going. And then being able to communicate that to the shopper, I think, is the next stage of that. Not only execute the procedures that need to be done, but actually the client then knows exactly the site that they're in has done that, which is good for everybody. I mean, it's not just a revenue driving tool; it's a brand reputation tool, right? It's a way of communicating to your clients that you're taking these things really, really seriously. And I think it sounds like a really interesting read, actually. The example that you give with regards to airlines using black boxes to make sure things are reported correctly and kind of taking the responsibility away from individuals on the floor to do that and just and then being just able to crack on, and then you can take care of the issues, I think is really in line with what we want to try and do, where we want to let people in stores do their job. Talk to customers when they're in there, try and make sure that they either convert a sale or cross sell and upsell and that kind of thing, and leave the stuff that needs to be done from a safety point of view or from an operational point of view to just kind of routine and then appropriate recording. So absolutely, we're very much well aware that when somebody goes into a store, when somebody begins their day work in a store or another deskless environment, they don't necessarily want to spend a whole day on the phone completing tasks. They want to spend it with customers and trying to drive revenue. So by taking away the need for long, convoluted safety procedures to be done in store and just making them quick, simple, and really low touch so that they can spend the time doing their job, basically.
So what does the future hold? Where's task tracking, employee engagement, learning platforms? Where are they heading, and what exciting stuff can we expect to come down the line?
I think one of the things that we're really focused on is continuing to help retailers. If we focus on retail, and I'll speak about other industries in a moment, but if we stick with retail for the moment, there's obviously been a real trend over the last several years to make the omni-channel experience completely synchronized. So when you're online browsing on a website and then when you go into store, you should have exactly the same feelings, the same identification with the brand, which then obviously will help you to sell more items or to convert customers in a quick way. And I think really one of the things that we want to do at Ubic is to, as I say, assist the retailers that we work with on that omni-channel journey. So, we're looking at innovations where online activity can actually inform the tasks that are sent to stores. So imagine a world where in the north of Scotland and the south of England, it's very cold in the north and very warm in the south. And online activity suggests that coats are being regularly searched in the north of Scotland and T-shirts are being regularly searched in the south of England. You want your stores to be able to reflect that. And obviously it's quite a broad example I give, but you can extrapolate it to more specific trends where regionalized online activity can actually educate how stores are being laid out through their tasks, but also how they're being trained. So you could give the training courses that I've spoken about, you could make sure that they're tailored to exactly what's going on in local areas. And this is obviously would be a massive, massive step forward and something that we're really working on to make it a reality where the online experience really educates how stores are being held out, being executed locally. And then in other areas, as I say, I think we've got some really exciting innovations with companies that are either in the supply chain of retail or in other industries, like I've mentioned hospitality and other sectors like that, where the focus, if they're customer facing, so hospitality is a good example, the focus on the customer experience, I think, is something that we've really seen a move towards, especially in things like not necessarily just fast food, but dining establishments where the idea is to attract customers in when there's competitive eating landscape, get them in, make sure they have a good experience, leave, and as a result then come back. So bringing some of that sort of retail thinking into the hospitality world, I think, is something that's really interesting. And then as I mentioned as well, in the supply chain, so things like logistics and being able to tie, making sure that goods are received properly without defects, and if they are, being able to sort those issues out early and seeing how that then fits into the rest of the journey that stores need to go on with regards to making sure that stocking is appropriate and other items like that. So both in terms of, I guess it's three-pronged. In our core traditional market of retail, making sure that we can work with them to increase the omni-channel element of their business, breaking into and trying to assist different industries with that sort of retail customer journey thinking that I was describing, and employee engagement experience thinking as well. So in other areas, making sure that staff are communicated to in an appropriate way. And then thirdly, making sure that the full spectrum of processes where, as we spoke about right at the beginning, pen and paper is used and traditional tools are used to monitor the processes is digitized, and that can and hopefully fit into a broader strategy that companies are going on so that they can collate all the data necessary and make the right strategic calls. So kind of three things really, I think, going into the future where deskless workers' lives are going to change, and Ubic hopes to be a part of that, and obviously hoping to work with you on executing that strategy as well. So I think although it's a slightly strange times in which we're having this conversation, I think it's accelerated some trends which make the future of retail and of hospitality and of other industries actually quite exciting. So it's an interesting future that hopefully we're going to embark on.
I look forward to seeing those come through and all the things that we haven't even consciously thought about yet. The omni-channel one's interesting because there's still not many great examples of where companies are really omni-channel. There still seems to be those silos of online kind of virtual, so bricks and mortar. So I think over the next months, hopefully quicker rather than later, those silos will be broken down even more. So exciting to see that come through. James, so if people want to find out more, want to see the product, just want a chat, where's the best place for them to find you and Ubic information?
Yeah, so the best place for them to go would be just ubic.com. You can fill in a quick form to have a chat with somebody and have a demo of the product if you want. We're on all the socials as well, so you can find us on LinkedIn and Instagram and things like that. But ubic.com is probably the best place to go to, YOOBIC.com. And you can find some of the use cases of clients that we work with at the moment, some of the new fields that we're working on at the moment that I've described as well. And as I say, if you want to have a chat and a demo, you can find a way to do it on ubic.com.
Final question then. What's the best bit of business advice you've ever been given?
Oh, the best bit of business advice I've ever been given. I think really, really listen, and not just listen to the words that are coming out, but listen to the challenges and the reason why the challenges is affecting somebody's life, somebody's work. So not just, why do you want to use a bit of technology or to improve revenue? Oh, so the impediments to improving revenue at the moment. So really listen very, very carefully to not just the words, but also the intuition, the thought behind the words that are coming as well. So that's probably the best bit of advice that I try and follow when working with the clients that we do.
Perfect. Well, on that note, we'll end it there. So really appreciate your time coming on. I've enjoyed this one. Look after yourself and we'll speak soon.
Good to talk, Simon. Thanks very much.